As millions of people are sickened by coronavirus around the world, conspiracies have swirled around the Chinese state-backed lab and the COVID-19 virus that some people believe originated there. China has repeatedly lashed out at such claims. Beijing says there is no evidence that suggests the virus was accidentally released from the Wuhan Institute of Virology and then into the human population. But some experts say it did. And one of them joins us today. I want to bring in Jamie Metzl. He is the founder of One Shared World, an advisor to the World Health Organization, and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Jamie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. So you have been claiming since last January that the most likely origin of COVID-19 is an accidental leak from a Wuhan lab. What made you come to that view a year ago, and what is your assessment now?
So 1 year ago, I was just using logic. I knew that this was a bat coronavirus, as we were all learning early last year. And as someone who'd recently been in Wuhan, I knew that Wuhan was far away from southern China, where these pandemic outbreaks tend to happen and where the horseshoe bats exist. I also knew that of all the gin joints in all of the towns in all the world, Wuhan was the one city in all of China that had a level 4 virology institute, and we've later learned was doing highly controversial gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses. And so when you put all of those pieces together, when you add information that we have about the virus that has the greatest genetic similarity to SARS-CoV-2, which is a virus extracted from a mine in southern China, and then we don't see any evidence of a transmission chain from southern China through these animal intermediate hosts that others have mentioned to get to Wuhan. And then on top of that, we look at and we see this massive Chinese cover-up of destroying samples, shutting off access to databases, imprisoning journalists, silencing scientists. And it raises some really big and fundamental questions that must be asked and must be addressed.
There are some American researchers, however, who say that they have worked in this lab in the past and that they would be very surprised if there were any leaks because they've seen the level of safety there. And of course, Beijing gave a glimpse into its top-level biosafety laboratory in Wuhan. Have you personally visited the lab yourself, and do you, not believe what these American researchers and what Beijing has shown is enough?
So I haven't visited the Wuhan Institute of Virology myself, but what we do know is that when a U.S. Embassy delegation visited the lab in 2018, they were aghast by the low level of security. And we also know that the Americans who partnered with the WIV and scientists even at the WIV itself aren't able to account for all of the viruses in their database. On top of that, we know that lots of level 4 and other level virology institutes around the world have had security breaches. So I just don't think it would be credible to say that we can rule this out because a few Americans have nice things to say about their Chinese counterparts.
And you've also written about holding Beijing accountable for the coronavirus. Tell us more about that. How would that work? And why do you think China would cover up such a virus? Is it really just, for economic reasons?
So let me start with that second question. China perhaps would have every reason to cover up if this terrible, deadly pandemic resulted from an accidental lab leak, which is bad enough, but followed by a criminal cover-up. I mean, that would be devastating for China, the authority of the Chinese government within China, for the standing of the Chinese government and China in the world. So we should assume that China would have an incentive to cover something like this up. And I'm not saying that we know for certain it's one thing or another. Maybe it could be a zoonotic jump in the wild. It could also very well be an accidental lab leak. But that's why what we need is a full and unrestricted international forensic investigation into the origins of the pandemic with access to everything. And China is not allowing that, and we have to ask why.
And what has been the role of the World Health Organization in all of this so far? And maybe you can give us an update on the status of the WHO's relationship with the U.S.
So the WHO is the essential organization for global health. If we didn't have it, we would need to invent it. And at the World Health Assembly last year, 130 countries came together to authorize an investigation into the origin of the pandemic and other things. Unfortunately, in the negotiation for the terms of reference for that investigation, China was given a veto on who gets to participate. And also it was determined that China would do the initial research and the investigation committee would simply oversee the work of these Chinese investigators. And now with all of the evidence that is accumulating, with all of the evidence of a cover-up, it's very clear, it should be clear, that an investigation that relies primarily on the transparency and goodwill of the Chinese government can no longer be considered credible. And that's why certainly the United States and other countries, we need to do all we can to support the World Health Organization. And as members of the world community, we all are stakeholders in asking some really tough questions about how the pandemic began. And we don't need to just point fingers at China. We need to point fingers at ourselves. China certainly has failed. The United States has failed. The World Health Organization has in many ways failed. We need to be asking these tough questions because for all we know, a worse pandemic is just around the corner, and shame on us if we're not doing all we can to be ready for that.
Yeah, it's crucial, of course. What is the latest then with the WHO's investigation into the origins of the pandemic? Is it on hold now?
No, it's not on hold. The team is going to be visiting China later this month, and certainly we should wish them well. But the problem is there are structural flaws in the terms of reference of the investigation itself that I believe will make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get to the bottom of what happened. And that's what we need. I mean, this is very difficult. It's very painful for everybody. I am certainly not an advocate. I hope that this isn't a laboratory leak, because that would be a terrible outcome. It would be awful if almost 2 million people were dead because of an avoidable accident. But just like when a plane crashes, we ask the tough questions. Why did the plane crash? We have to ask the tough questions now, but we need the ability and the authority and the access to get to the bottom of this.
Jamie Metzl, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
My great pleasure.